At 4:37 a.m. on the frozen outskirts of Pokrovsk, eastern Ukraine, the ground shook. A single explosion tore through a critical bridge. Steel folded, concrete collapsed, and in under 60 seconds, a front line supporting up to 35,000 Russian troops was severed. What looked like a local blast instantly became a strategic shockwave across the Donetsk front. This was not random. The strike hit the most sensitive artery of Russia's 41st Combined Arms Army. According to battlefield assessments, 500 to 1,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and food crossed that bridge every day. Trucks, fuel bowsers, medical vehicles, all gone. The supply rhythm stopped cold. Within hours, Russian units reported stalled armor. Artillery batteries slowed, then fell silent. Frontline formations were suddenly forced onto dirt tracks and improvised routes. In January, conditions those paths turned into mud traps. Logistics capacity plunged by 50 to 70% almost overnight. Pokrovsk was never just another town. It was the hinge point, west of Donetsk, east of the Ukrainian heartland. Moscow had pinned offensive momentum here after Avdiivka and Bakhmut. Victory at Pokrovsk promised operational depth. Failure meant isolation. Ukrainian unmanned units moved first. Drones circled, coordinates were fixed, and then the lifeline vanished. Inside the pocket, Russian airborne and marine brigades faced a brutal equation: limited fuel, shrinking ammunition stocks, and constant drone surveillance. Even light movement risked detection. Every kilometer now carried a price. Commanders rushed reinforcements forward, not with armored columns, with civilian vehicles, motorcycles, TVs. The images shocked even seasoned analysts. This was the moment the narrative cracked, because when an army built en masse suddenly loses movement, the battlefield does not pause. And then the unthinkable happened. To understand why Pokrovsk matters, the map must be read like a balance sheet. This town sits on the western edge of Donetsk Oblast, anchoring road and rail corridors that connect Russia's forward units to rear depots near Horlivka and Debaltseve. Control here determines whether heavy formations can advance west or stall in place. For Moscow, Pokrovsk was designed as the next operational lever after the grinding battles of Avdiivka and Bakhmut. Those fights cost time, equipment, and manpower, but they also opened corridors. Russian planners believed Pokrovsk would stabilize the line-shortened logistics routes and enable pressure toward Kostiantynivka and Sloviansk. That assumption rested on one pillar: logistics supremacy. For decades, Russian doctrine emphasized mass, railways, bridges, ammunition depots spaced every few dozen kilometers. In theory, this system allowed sustained pressure even under fire. The 41st Combined Arms Army, supported by airborne and naval infantry elements, was built around that idea. Ukraine understood this weakness early. Instead of contesting every trench, Kiev adopted an active defense doctrine. Let the formations advance, track them, then strike what feeds them. Drones replaced reconnaissance patrols. Precision strikes replaced mass barrages. A $500 drone hunted vehicles worth millions. The bridge near Pokrovsk was not symbolic, it was functional. Field estimates indicated the Russian grouping in this sector consumed 2,000 to 3,000 tons of supplies per week. Fuel for tanks, shells for artillery, medical kits, food. Without fixed crossings, none of that flows reliably. Seasonal timing made it worse. January thaw turned secondary roads into mud corridors. Wheeled vehicles bogged down. Tracked vehicles burned fuel at extreme rates. Each detour increased exposure to Ukrainian FPV drones loitering above supply routes. The contrast was stark. On one side, a numerically superior force relying on industrial-era logistics. On the other, a smaller army using networked sensors, real-time targeting, and decentralized strikes. Pokrovsk became the test case. If Russia could push through, it would validate attritional mass warfare. If Ukraine could choke the flow, it would prove that modern conflict favors agility over size. The bridge explosion tipped that balance. It exposed a structural vulnerability that no number of soldiers could immediately fix, and it set the conditions for escalation already unfolding across the front. The question now was no longer who had more troops, but who could keep them moving, supplied, and relevant under fire. The collapse did not arrive all at once. It came in layers, hour by hour, strike by strike. Within the first 24 hours after the bridge blast, Russian commanders attempted adaptation. Engineering units probed the site. Makeshift crossings were discussed. Supply convoys were rerouted south and north along dirt tracks. On maps, the alternatives looked workable. On the ground, they turned into traps. Ukrainian FPV drones waited along bends and tree lines. Thermal cameras pierced fog and snowfall. One truck stalled, then another. Every destroyed vehicle forced traffic to slow. Slower movement meant longer exposure. Longer exposure meant more strikes. The first mini-climax came west of Pokrovsk. A Russian 2S-9 Nona S self-propelled artillery system assigned to airborne units was concealed inside a civilian garden. It was a critical asset, lightweight, mobile, essential for paratrooper fire support. A Ukrainian drone spotted it within minutes. One precision strike followed. The gun never fired again. Silence spread across that sector. With artillery support reduced, Russian assault units pressed forward anyway, but this time armored vehicles were scarce. Fuel shortages limited tank use. Armored personnel carriers were redirected elsewhere. Commanders turned to what remained: motorcycles, ATVs, civilian cars. Under cover of fog, a Russian assault group of roughly 90 personnel advanced on light vehicles. Ukrainian National Guard units detected the movement almost immediately. Drones tracked the column. Machine gun fire followed. FPV drones closed in. When the fog lifted, the assault no longer existed as a fighting unit. Equipment losses included 10 ATVs, 4 motorcycles, and 6 cars. The message was unmistakable. This was not maneuver warfare, it was desperation. The second twist came days later. Reconnaissance footage from Ukrainian brigades revealed something analysts had not expected. Inside a Russian logistics hangar, alongside motorcycles and damaged trucks, stood horses. Actual horse-drawn carts were being prepared to move ammunition forward. In 2026, warfare hypersonic rhetoric collided with pre-industrial reality. Fuel shortages, destroyed trucks, impassable roads. Every factor pushed Russian logistics backward in time. Ukrainian drones did not discriminate. Anything that moved became a target. Then came the third escalation above the front lines. Near Kostiantynivka, a Russian Molniya-type kamikaze drone accelerated toward Ukrainian infantry positions. These systems are fast, small, and difficult to intercept without electronic warfare or air defense. Yet soldiers from Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade engaged it using only rifles. Against the odds, the drone was neutralized mid-air. It was a tactical moment with strategic weight. It demonstrated disciplined training and morale qualities increasingly uneven across the battlefield. Ukraine did not stop there. In Zaporizhia's Rivnopalia area, Ukrainian forces targeted the operators behind Russian FPV strikes. Intelligence units traced signal patterns. Reconnaissance drones identified shelters. Then a coordinated strike unfolded. Surveillance drones marked targets. Command drones directed timing. Attack drones executed. Russian FPV teams once considered secure were hit inside their positions. Modern warfare had turned into a hunter-killer loop. As pressure mounted, Russian information operations tried to fill the gap. Near Pavlivka, a group of Russian soldiers attempted to stage a filmed advance. The goal was not tactical gain, but footage. Ukrainian troops intercepted them before the camera could roll. The operation collapsed without a single shot fired. Similar reversals followed in Prydorozhny and surrounding settlements. Areas claimed as secured were either retaken or revealed as never held. Each exposure eroded credibility at home and confidence at the front. By mid-January, the Pokrovsk sector resembled a compressed battlefield. Russian units remained numerically significant, but movement was restricted. Fire support was uneven. Supply rhythm was broken. Ukrainian forces exploited every pause, every reroute, every delay. This was no longer about territory gained or lost in meters. It was about time. And time now favored the side that could strike faster, adapt quicker, and bleed the opponent without direct confrontation. The escalation phase had ended. What followed would ripple far beyond the front line. Once logistics fracture, consequences multiply, not just on the battlefield, but across the entire state system supporting the war. On the military level, the Pokrovsk disruption triggered an immediate slowdown. Russian artillery usage dropped sharply in affected sectors. Analysts tracking fire density noted pauses where batteries once fired continuously. Without steady resupply, even stockpiled shells became rationed. Tanks already constrained by fuel shortages were held back or repositioned defensively. This shift altered force ratios without changing headcounts. Field estimates placed 20,000 to 30,000 Russian personnel inside the Pokrovsk operational area, with reserves pushing the figure toward 35,000. On paper, that remained a formidable presence. In practice, combat effectiveness declined by the day. Units unable to rotate, refuel, or resupply lose cohesion fast. Morale follows logistics. The economic costs surged next. Each destroyed system carried a cascading price tag. The 2S-9 Nona S artillery platform alone carries an estimated unit cost of roughly $500,000. Under sanctions, replacement costs rise sharply due to component scarcity and reliance on foreign intermediaries. According to assessments cited by defense analysts and outlets such as Reuters and Defense News, sanction procurement adds 20 to 30% to replacement expenses. Then there is manpower cost. Independent estimates from institutions like CSIS and data aggregators tracking equipment and personnel losses indicate that compensation training and lost productivity per soldier reach approximately $150,000. Multiply that by the monthly attrition rates reported across multiple fronts, and the numbers scale fast. In January alone, battlefield losses and destroyed equipment represented several billion dollars in sunk cost. Russia's broader economy absorbs that strain unevenly. Defense spending for 2025 exceeded 13 trillion rubles, a historic high. Yet much of that funding cycles directly into replacement rather than expansion. Production bottlenecks persist. Skilled labor shortages worsen as factories compete with mobilization demands. Inflation pressures hover near 8%, while the ruble remains volatile against the dollar. Logistics collapse feeds this loop. Less equipment reaches the front, operational losses rise, replacement costs spike, the cycle tightens. Social impact follows close behind. Extended deployments without rotation amplify fatigue. Units report dwindling trust in command decisions, particularly when assaults proceed without armor or fire support. The reliance on motorcycles and civilian vehicles became a symbol not of ingenuity, but of exhaustion within the system. Strategically, Pokrovsk exposed a vulnerability with wider implications. Bridges, rail nodes, and depots across the front now appear less secure. Ukrainian doctrine has proven scalable. Strike the artery, not the muscle. This forces Moscow into a defensive recalculation. Engineering units repairing infrastructure must now operate under constant drone threat. Each repair attempt becomes a target window. Each delay compounds shortages. The military balance does not flip overnight. Russia retains depth manpower and firepower, but depth without flow becomes weight, and weight without movement becomes liability. What unfolded near Pokrovsk was not just a tactical success, it was a stress test, and the results are already reshaping decisions far from the front line. What happened at Pokrovsk does not stay at Pokrovsk. The shockwaves travel outward into NATO planning rooms, European capitals, Washington briefings, and even Asian security calculations. For NATO, the lesson is blunt. Mass alone no longer guarantees momentum. Alliance analysts have long warned that fixed infrastructure bridges, rail hubs, fuel depots represents a strategic Achilles heel in high-intensity conflict. Pokrovsk confirmed it in real time. A single strike costing a fraction of a fighter jet neutralized supply flows, sustaining tens of thousands of troops. This reality is already shaping doctrine debates. Cheap drones versus costly platforms. A $1,000 FPV drone threatening a $50 million jet or a multi-million-dollar artillery system is no longer theoretical. Defense planners across Europe are reassessing stockpiles, dispersal strategies, and redundancy. The European Union watches with particular urgency. Supply chain disruption in Ukraine feeds directly into broader security concerns. Energy infrastructure, rail corridors, industrial output. Several EU states bordering the conflict zone have accelerated investments in counter-drone systems and hardened logistics nodes, drawing direct lessons from Pokrovsk. The United States views the situation through a strategic competition lens. With Donald Trump in the White House, Washington's messaging emphasizes burden sharing and rapid capability adaptation. Pentagon assessments cited by major outlets point to Ukraine as a proving ground for next-generation warfare concepts. Distributed command, sensor-to-shooter loops, attritional pressure without large-scale maneuver. For US planners, Pokrovsk validates one core assumption: denying mobility can be more decisive than destroying formations outright. China is watching closely. Beijing's military analysts study logistics failures as carefully as battlefield victories. Taiwan scenarios hinge on supply flow, port access, and rapid disruption. The Pokrovsk case offers data, cheap systems, persistent surveillance, infrastructure denial. Chinese doctrine discussions increasingly reference similar patterns according to defense-focused reporting. The Middle East also takes note. From Yemen to the Red Sea, non-state actors have already demonstrated how low-cost systems can challenge expensive platforms. Pokrovsk reinforces that asymmetric logic: control movement, exhaust the opponent, avoid decisive clashes. Looking ahead 3 to 6 months, several scenarios emerge. If Russian forces attempt to rebuild fixed crossings, Ukrainian artillery and drones will likely contest every effort. That prolongs the logistical chokehold. If Moscow shifts to dispersed supply methods, throughput drops, further limiting offensive options. A third path, escalating firepower to compensate risks faster equipment depletion under existing sanctions. None of these options restore the pre-Pokrovsk balance quickly. Ukraine, meanwhile, is expected to expand this model, identify nodes, isolate sectors, force choices. Each success compounds the next. International observers increasingly describe this as a transition point, not a breakthrough, not a collapse, but a recalibration of how modern wars are fought and how they are sustained. The global implication is clear: future conflicts will not be decided only by who has more units, but by who keeps them supplied, connected, and protected under constant observation. Pokrovsk was a local battle. Its lesson is universal. The events around Pokrovsk compressed the entire war into a single lesson. Numbers still matter, territory still matters, but movement matters more, and movement depends on logistics that can no longer hide. What began with one bridge explosion exposed a chain reaction. Supply flow collapsed, firepower thinned, mobility vanished. Tens of thousands of troops remained present on the map, yet increasingly static in reality. An army designed for mass found itself constrained by precision. Ukraine did not need to overpower, it needed to isolate. By targeting infrastructure instead of formations, Ukrainian forces shifted the cost curve. Every destroyed truck saved ammunition, every stalled tank removed pressure, every delayed repair forced Russian commanders into harder choices. Push forward without fuel or wait under constant drone watch. The shock extended beyond the front line. Economic pressure mounted, replacement costs climbed, defense spending ballooned while output lagged. Social strain deepened as rotations slowed and confidence eroded. Pokrovsk became more than a location, it became a symbol of diminishing returns. Globally, the message traveled fast. NATO planners reassessed assumptions. The US studied scalable denial strategies. China observed how cheap systems neutralized industrial-era logistics. Across regions, military doctrine began to tilt toward dispersion, redundancy, and speed. This was not the end of a campaign, but it may mark the end of certain illusions. Mass without protection invites paralysis. Infrastructure without cover becomes liability, and size without adaptability turns into weight. As winter conditions persist and repair efforts face constant threat, the Pokrovsk sector remains unstable. The coming weeks will test whether Russian forces can restore flow under pressure, or whether isolation deepens further. Several questions now dominate strategic discussions. Can Russian engineering units rebuild and defend critical crossings under continuous surveillance? Will Ukraine replicate this logistics denial model across other sectors of the front? And if supply lines remain fractured, how long can large formations retain combat relevance without decisive escalation? The answers will shape not only the next phase of this war, but how future wars are planned and fought. Share your assessment in the comments. Does logistics now outweigh manpower? Can mass still break through precision? Subscribe for continued frontline analysis, strategic breakdowns, and real-time geopolitical